Welcome to Bamidbar. We're doing the memory system chapter by chapter. So we're starting with Parshas Bamidbar, and you will obviously notice why is this parsha called Bamidbar? Because the name of the parsha is a simon for you to know what's going on in the parsha. Like Bereshis, I wonder which parsha that represents. Yeah, the beginning, okay. What about Noach? Well, that's the main topic of the entire parsha. Lech Lecha is the main point of the beginning of the parsha. So when you look carefully, you will notice that the selected name Chazal gave for each one of the parshas of the entire Torah is a simon to remember what's going on in that parsha. So Bamidbar, we're in the Midbar. So we're going to learn now the 36 prakim of Chumash Bamidbar, starting with Parshas Bamidbar, Perek Aleph. In Perek Aleph, you've got the census of all Klal Yisrael. So look at the picture and you'll notice that you've got all 12 Shvatim, and Levi is set aside to the side. So you've actually got all 12 Shvatim, that's including Ephraim and Menashe, who are 2 Shvatim representing Yosef HaTzadik. So they are all the 12 Shvatim, but Levi, who would otherwise be a 13th, is set aside. So how are you going to remember that there's a census, there's a counting of all the 12 Shvatim? In Perek Aleph, 1 rhymes with son or gun. So I imagine each one of the Shvatim holding up a gun, and they are firing bullets each in turn. So Reuven fires 46,500 bullets into the air. Then it's Shimon's turn, and he fires 59,300, etc. So each one of them are firing bullets into the air, representing how many members there are of that shevet. And then when the total is tallied up, it comes to 603,550. But Shevet Levi, who's standing on the side, gunless, without any gun, he's not firing because he's not being counted right now. And he is not counted amongst the Shvatim because he has his own territory of the cities that he lives in. So in the census, Levi is not counted, but all the other 12 Shvatim are. Chapter 1, gun, firing into the air. How many bullets are representing how many people are in each shevet? Okay, number 2 rhymes with glue. In chapter 2, Bamidbar, Parshas Bamidbar, we see the formation of all the machaneh. There are 12 Shvatim, Levi, which isn't counted, but they are in the middle. And around them are all the other Shvatim. So to the east, you'll see Yehuda and Yisachar, and also Zevulun. My simon for that is yeast. East. I think of east. Oh, yeast. Yeast is Ya, Yehuda. Ya, again for Yisachar. And Z, Yiz. And then T, I make that into one word, so it sounds like yeast. So Ya, east. So it's Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zevulun for the Z part of yeast, and then it ends off sounding like east. So in the east side, you've got Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zevulun. Then on the west side, you've got what I call it kind of Wembley. That's where I was born. So this is not something you're going to use, but I'm just showing you how my mind works. I'll associate it with the word Wembley, where is west, M is Ephraim, Menashe, and B, Binyamin. So how will I remember that those 3 Shvatim are on the west side of the Machaneh? I'm just giving you just samples of how your brain can figure these things out. If you're looking for a simon, you just put the words together and figure out what that sounds like, and then create some sort of simon for yourself. So for me, W is west, Ephraim, M, Menashe, B, Binyamin, and it's almost spelling out the word Wemb. And that reminds me of Wembley, where I was born and raised, as in Wembley Stadium, for those of you who might be familiar with soccer. Okay, so that's the east, that's the west. What do you do with south? For me, I just think of, well, in the south you've got Reuven and Shimon and Gad. So I think Rosh, Gad, south. That's all I think. Rosh, Gad, south. Reuven, Shimon, and Gad are in the south. And then the north is Dan, north. Dan is D for Dan, and A for Asher, and N for Naphtali. So Dan, north. So in this card you will see where all the Shvatim are located, and that's in chapter 2. Rhymes with glue. So in chapter 2, glue, my funny story to associate that is very simple. I just imagine that there is a puzzle set of Machaneh Yisrael. And each one of the Shvatim is a puzzle piece, and when you put them all together, you glue it all together, then you have finally finished the entire puzzle. And then what I do is I see it glued on my wall next to my bed, and before school I revise and review all the Shvatim where they are located: Yeast, Wemb, and Dan, north, Rush, Gad, south, etc. Okay, ready for Perek Gimel. We're still in Parshas Bamidbar. Gimel, chapter 3, rhymes with tree. In chapter 3, you'll notice that on the card, you've got two pictures. You've got the picture of the four sons of Aron HaKohen. You've got Nadav and Avihu, who passed away in Toz. Very good, chapter 10. And then you've got Elazar and Isamar. So these are the four sons of Aron HaKohen. They are listed as the genealogy of Aaron, and then you've got the genealogy of the Leviim. There's also a census of the Leviim in Perek Gimel, but right now you see these just two pictures to pick those two main points in Perek Gimel. So you've got the sons of Levi, who are Gershon, Kehat, and Merari. On top of each one of these three, you see on top of Gershon, you see a miniature of the curtains in the Mishkan. That's the Yiriyos. And on top of Kehat, you see the Aron, because he carried the Aron on his shoulders, and any Levi was allowed to, but Kehat was primarily the one who was carrying the Aron. And then you've got Merari, who were in charge of transporting, dissembling and assembling and transporting the Kerushim and all the different pillars, both of the Mishkan itself and of the Chatzar and its accessories like the bars and the sockets. So these are the two major points. There's also a census of the Leviim in Perek Gimel. So how am I going to remember all this? Is in chapter 3, tree. So in my funny association, I imagine I see in a tree the four sons of, very good, Aron HaKohen. And who are they? Very good. Isamar, very good. Who else? Okay, Elazar. Who are the first two? Nadav and Avihu. So I see them in the tree, and I see them jumping down from the tree. And then I see the three sons of Levi, Kehat, Merari, and Gershon, pop up in the places of the four sons who jumped down, who were the sons of Aaron. So now you've got those associated to tree. And if you want to add in the census, then you can have numbers falling from the leaves instead of leaves. You see numbers falling down, and that would be reminding you of the census. So tree, tree. In chapter 3 is the genealogy of Aron HaKohen, his sons, and the genealogy of Levi and the census. Moving on to chapter 4, Dor. This is chapter 4, Dor, in Parshas Bamidbar. Not to be confused with chapter 4, Dor, which continues into Parshas Nasai, which is coming next. So Parshas Bamidbar, last chapter, chapter 4, Dor. You see in this picture, you've got the duties of Kehat. The duties of Kehat. So Kehat is one of the sons of Levi, and Kehat was in charge of carrying the Aron, and also covering the Aron and the Shulchan and the Menorah. So let's look at these pictures. So you've got the sons of Levi covering the Aron, covering the Shulchan, covering the Mizbeach HaZahav, the golden Mizbeach, the golden altar, covering the Menorah. All of these are covered in Techeles. And then you've also got Levi covering the Mizbeach HaNechoshes, which is the outside bronze or copper altar. And then you have Elazar ben Aaron, Kohen Gadol. Elazar is the son of Aaron, and he's in charge of all these duties of Kehat, the son of Levi. And Elazar Kohen, he is also in charge of these three items: the Shemen HaMishcha, which is used for smearing the Kohen Gadol and every Kohen who starts his avodah. It's also used for smearing all the kelim when the avodah is first used with that keli, and is also in charge of smearing the Melech al Yisrael. And lastly, he's in charge of the Keteres. So these are the three items that he's in charge of. So how will we remember that the duties of Kehat are in chapter 4, Dor? So I imagine in my funny story that you got this guy called Kehat, and he's doing a magic show, and he covers a door on stage with a large sky blue techeles cloth. And then when he pulls it away, the door is missing. And instead you see all these different kalim in their place. Then he covers that area with the cloth again, pulls it away, and lo and behold, a door. So he's doing this magic show where the door reveals behind it these kalim, the Aron, the Shulchan, the Menorah, and the Mizbeach HaZahav, Mizbeach HaNechoshes. And then he pulls away the blue drape. Why blue? Because that's the techeles color that was used in covering all these kalim. And then when he pulls it away the second time, you see it's back to the door again. So that's his Kehat's magic show. So we're now up to chapter 4 in Parshas Nasai. Parshas Nasai means carrying, and that's a simon to tell you what's going on in that perek, or in that parsha. So in Parshas Nasai, it starts off chapter 4 with the duties of Gershon and Merari, and then gives you a census, a numbering, a counting of who's in those two sons of Levi. How many Jews there are, how many Leviim. So let's start off with the picture where you see Gershon in charge of all the urias, the curtains, the coverings, the drapes of the Mishkan. And then you've got Merari, who's in charge of the dissembling and assembling and carrying of all the krushim, all the pillars, all the bars that went through the middle of each of the krushim, and also all the sockets, all the ropes and the pegs that held the ropes into the ground, and the ropes were helping hold up the Mishkan and its chotzer. So Merari, who's in charge of all the dissembling and assembling and carrying of the krushim and the pillars helping hold up the Mishkan. So all this is in chapter 4. One of the ways I remember is I think of Gershon draped in draperies and curtains, and then just imagine Merari mistakenly taking a bite out of a keresh, out of a pillar, and so bitter. Merari, bitter. So I imagine him biting out of a piece of wood, and it's very bitter. So that's how I just remember that. But how do you remember this is endorsed? So in my funny story, and again, you have to use your imagination. If you come up with a connection that makes more sense for you, go with it. And again, please don't get stuck. The funny story is not the ikr here at all. It's just a hichatim. It's a way to be able to find information in your brain, so that your brain has a file name for things you learn, as opposed to not having a file name and you don't know where to find it afterwards. But once you create a simon, your brain knows automatically where to find it. I know I've repeated that a few times, but it's really important. I don't want people saying, this is crazy, you're making fun of the Torah. Has v'shalom, that's not what we're talking about. We're just using a principle that you find in Chazal called Ein Torah nikas ela b'samanim. And I'm showing you how, it's not the only way, but it's one way of how to use simonim. There's a great sefer, by the way. I may have mentioned this much earlier in the memory system, which is in building block number 6, but you should really check it out. It's called Shitat HaShiluv. Shitat means a policy or method. Hashiluv of dovetailing, of connecting, of associating. So Shitat HaShiluv, which was written by the Rav of Vilna after communism fell, Rabbi Smith. I actually knew him myself. He used to come and test the Bochrim in Gateshead. He would come up like twice a year to visit us. He was a Baki in Shas. He used to finish 14 blot a day. And he would explain to us that he was writing a sefer, which he did write, called Shitat HaShiluv, based on the Vilna Gaon, where you organize the information and then you thread it together, you associate it together with a funny story. So how will I remember all this is in chapter door 4? So I imagine Gershon's head stick out of the door, like crushed through the door, and you see this big G on his head. So I see a door with Gershon's head come through it, smashes through, big hole in the door, and head sticking out with a big G for Gershon. Opens up the 2 doors from his mouth, and out come the urios. Those were the curtains that covered the Mishkan, urios, and also the paroiches, that's the drape in front of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that separate the Kodesh from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and then the Masach, which was on the front of the Mishkan and also of the Chatzah. It was called a Masach, that's a screen. I see those curtains and the Preches and the screen come out the mouth. Can you see that? And then I see Merari shooting out of his mouth with a big M on his forehead, and at the end of his legs and his arms, I see the krushim and the pillars are attached to his arms and legs, and the ropes flying from there. So that's in 4 door. Door, head come through the door with a G on it, opens his mouth. Instead of TTC, 2 doors open up, and out come of the doors, draperies, curtains, paroiches, and urias, and the masach. Followed by, if you want to see Merari holding on to the last masach, the last screen coming out of the mouth of the 2 doors, and then you'll see him, Merari, with the krushim and the pillars sticking out of his arms and his legs, followed by ropes and pegs. So that reminds me, Merari is the one who's in charge of those items. So that's all in chapter 4, door. Okay, so we're up to chapter 5. In Parshas Nasai. In this, you see a picture of the 3 types of people that, when they are tameh, are thrown out of the machaneh. So you've got tumas meis, you've got tzara, someone's who tzara, and also someone that is tameh zav. So these are the 3 that are thrown out of the machaneh. I personally remember that tuma has an aleph at the end, so I know he's thrown out of one machaneh. Zav has a vase at the end, so he's thrown out of the two machanos. And the third one, who's Tumas Metzora, I see the mem, the M in Metzora, looks like a 3 when you turn it on its side. So he's thrown out of all 3 machanos. So that's just my simon for remembering those 3 types of tumah and how many machanos they're sent out of. Now, the second picture shows you the picture of the soiter. Here's a lady who's been accused of adultery, of being unfaithful to her husband, and the husband caught her alone with another married person and says, hey, as in chapter 5. Oh, hey, what's going on? Hey! So, hey, 5, is it for soiter. So in chapter 5, I imagine, in my funny story, the husband saying, hey, and that for me brings in chapter 5, and you'll just schlep in somehow or other, you'll make a connection for the people who are thrown out of the machane. Whether it's 1, 2, or 3. 1 would be Tumas Meis, 2 is Zav, and 3 is Metzora. M on its side looks like a 3. Okay, good. So the Soita, she brings a korban. As you know, the story, the whole procedure is described in chapter 5 of the Soita being accused, bringing a korban, which is not allowed to have any shemen or levona placed on it. And the Kayan then takes water, which has crushed into it a piece of parchment with one of Hashem's names actually written on it, and now it's erased by the crushing into the water, and she has to drink it unless she admits that she did make a mistake, or if she still refuses and claims that she's innocent, she'll drink the water, and if indeed she's innocent, nothing happens, and if she isn't, then she dies. See the Chumash for more details. Okay, that's all in chapter 5. Hey! Okay, chapter 6. We're still in Parashas Nasai. In this picture, you have 2 parts. Part 1 is the halachas of a Nazir, all the mitzvahs to do with a Nazir. There are actually 10 mitzvahs, even though you'll see 13 pictures here. 10 of them are the mitzvahs of a Nazir. And then you've got Birkat Kohanim, depicted by the special formation of the fingers. So in the laws of the Nazir, you'll see he's not allowed to drink wine, not allowed to eat grapes, raisins. He's not allowed to eat zagim, which are grape skins. He's not allowed to have the hartsanim, which are the seeds in the heart of the grapes. That's how I remember hartsanim are grape seeds, because it's the heart of the grape. And then he has to cut all his hair and not allowed to become tummy mace. He's not allowed to be in the same building under the same roof as a mace. The other items here are to do with the procedure of him becoming tahor, which is all his hair is completely cut, all of his hair, and is not allowed to become tummy mace, and finally he goes into a mikveh to become tahor. So all those mitzvahs are in chapter 6, and then followed by Birkat Kohanim. How will we remember all this is in chapter 6? Sticks. So I imagine that the Nazir dips inside the water, and he's sticking out 6 sticks from the water. Can you see 6 sticks sticking out of the water? And on top of one stick is a sheitel with all his hair. On top of another stick is a bottle of wine. Another stick has a box of raisins. Another stick has grape seeds. And then you've got the grape skins. So I see 6 sticks, and each one has something that is connected to the Nazir. Whether it's hair at the end of a stick, or wine, raisins, grape seeds, grape skins, and finally, I might probably have there a pair of scissors sticking out another stick, so that remind me that he has to have all his hair cut at the end. The scissors also denote that he is not allowed to have a haircut during the time that he's a Nazir. So there's 2 types of cutting. One is he's not allowed to cut his hair all the time that he's a Nazir, but when he's finished being a Nazir, to become tahor, he actually has to have a complete haircut. But it's not just a haircut, every single hair on his entire skin is completely shaved off, and then he enters the mikveh. So 6 sticks in the mikveh, and then finally I will see 2 hands stick out of the mikveh on the end of sticks and do the formation of Birkat Kohanim. That's my way of remembering the 6. Can you see 6 sticks do all those things? And if not, you come up with your own simanim, your own funny story that connects. Okay, we're ready for the last chapter in Parshas Nasai. So chapter 7, heaven, but also goes with cow. C, hard C, OW don't count, and therefore it's just 7. So in chapter 7, Parshas Nasai, you have the 12 offerings of the Nesiim, of the princes, the heads of each of the 12 Shvatim. So you've got actually here 12 cows that are carrying 6 wagons. So it's 2 cows per wagon. And on those wagons are all the materials that are in the Mishkan, except of course Kehat, who carried all the kelim on their shoulders, especially the Aron. But all the other items, the actual kerushim, the pillars, and all the bars of the pillars and the sockets, and all the curtains, all that was carried on the wagons that were brought by these 12 cows carrying 6 wagons. So representing each of the Nesachim, each of them had a separate day, 12 days total, to bring all the different items that are in picture number 2. So a nice long list. So all that's in chapter 7. The way I remember it is I see these 12 cows, they're really oxen. I see 12 cows flying through the air, pulling 6 wagons. So everyone points up to the sky and says, oh my gosh, is that a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's the cows carrying all the items for the Mishkan. And then, of course, following the 12 Nesachim, bringing all their korbanos. 7 cow, korbanei ha-Nesachim. Welcome to Parshas Behaloischa, Perek Ches, chapter 8, gate. In chapter 8, you'll see the card, basically one picture with a corner picture. Aron HaKohen lights the menorah. He does that every single day. And in the corner, you see a person immersing in the mikveh. This refers to, in chapter 8, is the inauguration of all the Leviim. You remember in chapter 8 gate, all the Kohanim were initiated in their avodah. Over here, it's chapter 8 gate in Bamidbar. The other one was in Vayikra. Here it's Parshas Behaloischa, chapter 8, where the Leviim are inaugurated. They are initiated. They start their active operation as Leviim working in the Beis HaMikdash, starting with Aron HaKohen lighting the menorah every single day, chapter 8 gate. So how are we going to remember that? So in chapter 8 gate, I imagine Leviim following Aron HaKohen, climbing the gate, and from there diving into the mikveh. So in chapter 8 gate is the lighting of the menorah, and also the Leviim becoming tahor and beginning their active role in serving in the Beis HaMikdash. Chapter 9, wine. We're still in Parshas Behaloischa. You'll look at the picture, you'll see that the main points that are taking place in chapter 9, are, number 1, the Korban Pesach, number 2, Korban Pesach Sheni, and then number 3 is the travels in the Midbar were directed by the cloud during the day and the pillar of fire by night. So here you've got the picture of the Korban Pesach Rishon, and then Korban Pesach Sheni, and then the 2 pictures here of the cloud by day, directing the Klal Yisrael. If it was on top of the Mishkan, it stopped. That told us to assemble the Mishkan and set up the Machaneh, set up camp. And then at nighttime, that same cloud would change to a pillar of fire. So those are the 4 items that are taking place in chapter 9, wine. How will I remember that? So I see 4 wine bottles, 9 wine, wine 9. I see 4 wine bottles, and on top of one, I see the Korban Pesach Rishon. On top of the second one, Korban Pesach Sheni with a number 2 on the lamb. And then number 3, I see a cloud coming out of the bottle. And number 4, I see a pillar of fire coming out of the bottle. So it's the bottle of wine, Korban Rishon, Korban Sheni of the Pesach, and then cloud and fire. Chapter 10, toes in Parshas Behaloischa. Here you have a list of the 7 reasons why the special silver trumpets were blown. Number 1, not necessarily in this order, but to call all the leaders together to the Machaneh, the Sanhedrin, the leaders, or to call all of Bnei Israel together. Moshe Rabbeinu would announce or declare, teach the mitzvahs. So that's all of Klal Yisrael. They would blow the trumpets for that. If they had to go to war, they blow the trumpets. As they began every single journey, the trumpets would sound. That would initiate everybody to get in formation. And then the trumpets would sound again for the various formations. There were different blasts, whether it's tekiah or teruah, and based on the different combinations was the signal of whether it's to gather the Sanhedrin or all Bnei Israel, or go to war, or to prepare for setting out on a journey, and then also the formation. And then finally, they would also blast the trumpets for any korban sibud. So these are the 7 reasons for blasting the trumpets. So how will I remember this is in 10 toes? Because I think of a trumpet sticking out of each one of my 2 big toes and blasting out teruah tekiah in order to announce these 7 reasons for blasting the trumpets. We are now up to chapter 11, Perek Yud Aleph, Parshas Behaloischa. Very painful perek, a lot of things going here. You'll look at the card, you'll see the 6 items representing much more actually than what's really going on in these pictures. But first of all, the Eruv Rav complain in chapter 11, date. They complain, oh, we haven't had a rest. We're doing all this traveling. What happened? Hashem sent down firebolts from Shemayim, and thousands of Eruv Rav were zapped. What happened next is the same Eruv Rav, the survivors, start complaining, we want meat, and we miss the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions that we used to have in Mitzrayim. So complaints is the worst of Aveira. Really, it's like the opposite of Hakaras HaTov, of gratitude to all that's good in our lives. So Hashem was not happy with that. What happens next is Moshe Rabbeinu says, Rebbeinu Shalom, I can't carry the weight of all Klal Yisrael and their constant complaints. So Hashem says, you're right, I'm going to give you a delegation system of 70 elders who will share in this burden. Amongst them were 2 who started being misnaber, started giving a nevuah that Moshe Rabbeinu was going to die and Yeshua was going to enter Eretz Yisrael. That's Eldad and Medad, but that's also in this picture. Moving forward, then Hashem sent the response to the complaints for meat with quail. This was a special, very fatty, delicious bird known as salav, or in English translated as quail. And thousands of them ended up falling upon the machaneh, and the Eruv Rav started eating them. In the middle of them eating the quail, they died choking on the meat. And that place was called Kivrot HaTa'ava, Kivrot HaTa'ava, which means the cemetery of cravings. So their love for food didn't really pay off, and so they ended up eating their graves with their mouths, so to speak. So all this is in chapter 11, date. How am I going to remember it's in date? So I imagine the Eruv Rav were getting fed up and complaining, and so what they start doing is throwing a date. Each one of them is throwing a date to Shemayim, and they're screaming a chant, we're fed up with the mun. We want rest, meat, and fun. We're fed up with the mun. We want rest, meat, and fun. We're fed up with a man, throwing a date. Each one of them throwing a date. We want rest, meat, and fun. So these were the complaints of the Eruv Rav while they're throwing a date. And Hashem sends down these firebolts that wipe them out. Let's go to 12:10. Chapter 12:10 in Parshas Ba'aloischa is the story of Miriam speaking Lashon Hara against her brother Moshe Rabbeinu, not with the intent to denigrate him, has v'shalom, but it was still considered, especially for her madriga, it was still considered Lashon Hara. She said it to Aron HaKohen. So in this picture you see Miriam speaking to Aron HaKohen about Tzipora. How come she has to separate from Moshe Rabbeinu? It's not fair. And that was considered Lashon Hara, and in doing so, Miriam had to be sequestered. She was isolated from the machaneh. As you can see in the second picture, she's outside of the machaneh as a din of someone who's got saras, a metzora. She had to wait for 7 days till after the quarantine, after she was isolated. The Kohen, her brother Aron HaKohen, checked that the saras had disappeared. She'd done teshuvah, and Klal Yisrael waited for those 7 days in Midah Keneged Midah, for her waiting the short period of time that Moshe Rabbeinu was in the Nile till Batya found him. She got the schus, the merit, to be deserving of Klal Yisrael waiting 7 days for her. So everything you do always gets counted in Shemayim and will be rewarded many, many, many more times than the good that we ever do in this world. So Miriam speaking Lashon Hara is in chapter 12:10. How will I remember that? So we have a simple simon. I imagine that Miriam is inside a tin outside of the machaneh, and I see her calling out Tamid, Tamid to anyone who passes by, because that's one of the dinim, the laws of Metzora. Someone who has saras has to call out Tamid, Tamid to anyone who passes by, in order they should not come within 4 amos contact of the person with saras. In chapter 13, Parsha Shlach, 3 chapters, Perek Yud Gimel, chapter Tami, starts with the whole story of the Meraglim, the spies, begins here. Moshe Rabbeinu sends 12 spies to check out Eretz Canaan, which will be Eretz Yisrael. The spies come back with an evil report, except of course for Kalev ben Yefuneh and Yeshua ben Nun. They're the only 2 who insist that the land is really good. You can trust Moshe ben Amram, let's go. However, Klal Yisrael sided for the most part with the other 10 Rishayim, wicked spies. This is all in chapter 13. tummy. How will I remember this story takes place in tummy? So I imagine the 12 spies, 10 of them are crawling on their tummy, as spies often do when they're spying out land so they don't get seen by their enemies. I see 10 of them crisscrossing the whole of Eretz Yisrael, back and forth, all the way up and down Eretz Yisrael for 40 days and 40 nights on their tummy. I mean, that's kind of uncomfortable. And Yeshua ben Nun and Caleb ben Yefuna, who were only afraid of Kadosh Baruch Hu and nothing else, were not afraid to stand up and walk not on their tummy. So chapter 13, tummy, the spies go to Eretz Yisrael, spy out land. Chapter 14, Parsha Shlach, goes with Tyre. Chapter 14 is the response of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the Meraglim. They gave an evil report in chapter 13, Tamid. In chapter 14 is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm done with these people. I'm going to destroy all of them and just start Klal Yisrael all over again, just with you, Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu begs HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the 13 midas of Rachamim that he learnt in Shemayim when he was on Har Sinai. HaKadosh Baruch Hu finally forgives all Klal Yisrael. V'slachti kidvarecha. However, what's going to happen is every single Jew from the age of 20 to 60 is going to die in the Midbar over the next 40 years. And every single one of them that complained is not going to enter the land. So Kadosh Baruch Hu brought about the death of all the 10 evil spies. They died a horrible death. They were found with their tongues elongated all the way down to their belly button, and horrible little kind of shrotzim lice going up and down their tongues. This was because they used their tongues against the gift that Kadosh Baruch Hu gave the Jewish people, Eretz Yisrael. Don't speak Lashon Hara against Eretz Yisrael. And that night, when the Jews cried, thinking the spies gave a report that's accurate and wished that they had gone back to Eretz Yisrael, in chapter Tamid, HaKadosh Baruch Hu now in chapter 14 says, okay, I'm going to reserve this night, Tisha B'Av, for tragedy for the rest of our future. So most of the worst ever tragedies have happened on Tisha B'Av. The destruction of the Beit Rishon, the first Beis HaMikdash, the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, both were on Tisha B'Av. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain, Tisha B'Av. First, Second World War, Tisha B'Av. The worst has happened to us in this period. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu reserved that date as punishment for the Chet HaMeraglim. So how are we going to remember that all this happened in chapter 14, Tyre? So in my funny story, I imagine the whole of Eretz Yisrael being surrounded by a wall of tires that would stop Klal Yisrael from entering Eretz Yisrael for the next 40 years. That's a long time. And these tires didn't get tired of staying there for 40 years to stop Klal Yisrael entering Eretz Yisrael. So that's chapter 14. Move to chapter 15, last chapter in Parsha Shalach. Here you have a picture of, going in order, the Mincha offering and the wine with shemen and yain. And that means every single korban had to be accompanied by a mincha and nisuch hayayin. And the mincha was also given shemen on it, had oil. The next mitzvah you see is the mitzvah of taking challah from the dough. The next mitzvah, you see someone who is megadef, has v'shalom, someone who's mekalel, is cursing Hashem. We also have in this perek the Mekoshesh Eitzim, the person who went out on Shabbos and started collecting twigs and wood for fire on Shabbos. He was tried and convicted for his crime in violating the first Shabbos ever. And then you've got the picture here of Tzitzit, because the Parsha of Tzitzit is also mentioned in this Parsha. Chapter Tesvav, chapter 15, Parsha Shlach. So how are we going to remember all this? Is in chapter Tail. Tesvav 15 is tail. So I imagine a tail stirring the shemen and the wine with the dough. That reminds me of the mincha. Also reminds me of challah. That's the way I'm going to do it. So I see the tail stirring all this. And then at the top of the tail, I see a mouth complaining. You see the mouth on top of the tail complaining. You know what? I really don't like this. And for complaining, that reminds me of the megadef, the mekalel, someone who's cursing or has complaining against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then I see tzitzit coming out of the top of the tail and tying him down to the ground. And that reminds me of the mitzvah of tzitzit. That's my funny story to connect it all. Can you see the tail stirring the korban mincha with yain and shemen? And then you see a mouth at the top of the tail. Do you remember the mouth at the top of the tail? Complaining. Oh, and then the tzitzit coming out, strapping him down to the ground until he's caught by the police, I guess, and he's tried and tested, and he is convicted for being makal against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that all that is in chapter tail. Now we're ready to move to Parshas Korach, also a very painful parsha. Here you have the rebellion of Korach. It's in Tish, and it's in chapter 16. Parshas Korach is the famous story of Korach's rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu, and he managed to get Dasan and Aviram, not a very difficult thing to persuade for these two Rishayim, these two wicked people, to join in. But what was really amazing is they actually persuaded 250 leaders of Klal Yisrael to join in the rebellion. The response was, Moshe Rabbeinu told them, look, if it's true as you claim that I am making all this up myself and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not the one who appointed me to tell you all these mitzvahs, then I assure you, you're going to die a normal death. But if HaKadosh Baruch Hu really has appointed me, and you're rebelling really against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's appointed me, and it's not from me that all this is happening, you're going to die an extremely unusual death. In fact, the ground is going to open up and swallow you. No sooner than Moshe Rabbeinu finished his sentence, the ground began to tremble, it split, opened up, Korach and all his family, wife and children, and Dasan and Aviram and all their wives and children got swallowed up by the ground, and it closed up right in front of Klal Yisrael. Everyone's screaming, running for their lives, and the 250 leaders who also joined Korach, they did not get swallowed up, they got fried from firebolts coming down and burning them on the spot. Whoa! This was immediate response from rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu, who had tried every effort to make shalom between Korach and Dasan and Aviram. Didn't work, and they paid the price. Don't start up with the leaders of Klal Yisrael, not even if you're a Jew. So all this took place in chapter Dish 16. How will we remember this? So I imagine Korach standing on top of a table, and he's frisbeeing out dishes to everybody, and on these dishes you have to say, I vote for Korach, I vote for Korach. So he's got a list of all the people to vote for. You can either vote for Korach or for Korach or for Korach. So you have to choose between those three, and it's all written on the dish, and they check it off, and they all voted for Korach. So this was the rebellion of Korach on the Tish, where he's dealing out dishes, a dish for every person, and you see, checking off Korach, they vote for Korach. Keep out of politics, it's just all politics. So you don't want to get into politics, you just get swallowed up, literally. So that's chapter Tish. Now we're ready for chapter 17, Parshas Korach. Chapter 17 goes with Doc, as in a doc, who's a doctor, but it's an abbreviation of Doc. So in chapter 17, you'll see in your picture, there's the making of copper from all the Keteris pans, which in the previous parak, all the 215 leaders of Klal Yisrael brought Keteris on Moshe Rabbeinu's suggestion to see which one of them is going to get chosen. So they all got fired, literally, and now the remaining 250 pans, because they were brought with the intent to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu instructed Moshe Rabbeinu to take these copper Keteris pans and melt them into one big liquid copper that would then be smelted onto the sides of the Mizbeach and would cover the entire Mizbeach HaChitzah in the outside altar. So that's the first picture. The next picture shows Klal Yisrael complaining again about the deaths. You see the little bubble there of the speech bubble of people dead, complaining about the deaths that took place the day before when Korach and all his followers got swallowed up by the ground. So Hashem was very upset with that. And then a whole plague began immediately, and thousands of Jews started dying. Moshe Rabbeinu and Aron went down on the ground, begging HaKadosh Baruch Hu to please forgive Klal Yisrael. But Moshe Rabbeinu told Aron, it's not going to work this time. You have to take the Keteris, quickly run through the Machaneh, and burn the Keteris. So Aron HaKohen goes up real quick, and he stops the plague. So the very Keteris, which the people were complaining about, why don't we get a chance to bring Keteris? And now they're saying, look how it killed so many people the day before, and now you made these pans into copper around the Mizbeach, but it's really the Keteris kills people. Now you see the Keteris was also saving them, but not until 24,700 Jews died in that plague, in a matter of probably minutes, before Aron HaKohen was able to quickly bring the Keteris on the fire pan. So 24,700 Jews died in that terrible plague, and then they're still complaining. Hashem said, look, here, test the Jews. Take one stick for each shevet and bring it into the Mishkan, and each shevet will have its name written on the stick, and then Aron HaKohen will have his stick as well for the Levium, and we'll see which one blossoms. The one that blossoms is the one that I've chosen to serve me in the Beis HaMikdash. The next day, Moshe Rabbeinu pulls out all 12 sticks, and the one that blossomed, obviously, was that of Aron HaKohen. So it blossomed almonds, and that was a stick that therefore demonstrated Hashem's choice of who's going to serve me in the Beis HaMikdash. So how we're going to remember all this is in chapter 17. So imagine a doc, that's a doctor, holding out a death certificate with the number 24,700 on it. 24,700 Jews and their names, long list, very small writing, of 24,700 Jews that died in this terrible plague. And then I see a stick coming out of the forehead of the doc, blossoming almonds, and that reminds me that the stick of Aaron is the one that was chosen by Hashem to serve in the Beis HaMikdash, and all that's in chapter 17, Parshas Korach. Chapter 18. In chapter 18, you see two pictures. A picture of the Leviim guarding the Mishkan, and then the Kohen, you see the Kohen's hat over there, receiving a gift with the number 24 on it. So what's going on over here? In chapter 18, in Parshas Korach, the duties of the Kohanim are listed, and the 24 gifts for the Kohanim and the Leviim is also listed. So the Leviim, for example, are in charge of guarding the Beis HaMikdash. They have to guard it day and night. They've got rotation of various shifts, but they're never allowed to leave the Beis HaMikdash unguarded. They don't actually guard it with weapons, they guard it with themselves, but this is to prove that Hashem doesn't need the Beis HaMikdash to be guarded. Hashem guards it. So why does he need guards? That's only as a covered to the palace of Hashem. So it's really to bring respect to Hashem. There's no other reason. It doesn't need guarding because Hashem needs guarding. So the Beis HaMikdash had to be guarded 24/7, 365, and the Leviim took shifts in doing so, day and night. You'll also find in this particular parak other laws of the Leviim, like they're not allowed to do each other's jobs. Each Levi had to do what he was assigned to do, whether it was opening or closing gates, whether it was guarding, whether it was singing, whether it was playing instruments during the bringing of a carbon sibur. All the jobs in the Beis HaMikdash were allocated specifically to each Levi, and a Kohen couldn't do a Levi's job, and neither could a Levi do a Kohen's job. You were never allowed to terminate the guarding of the Beis HaMikdash, and then you got a list of the various matanas, the various gifts that Klal Yisrael had to give as taxes to the Kohanim and to Leviim. So there's two parts to Perek Yud Ches, chapter 18, Dav, and that is the duties of the Kohanim and Leviim, and the list of Matnas Kahuna, the gifts that were given to the Kohanim and also to the Leviim, 24 in total. So how are we going to remember? That's in chapter 18, Dav. So in my funny story, I imagine a Dav, 18, D is 1, V is and F are both 8, O and E in Dav fall away, so Dav is 18, DV. So I see a dove flying over Machane Yisrael, and as soon as it arrives directly on top of the Machane Shechina, which is where the Mishkan is, and the Leviim surrounding the Machane Shechina, then I see it drop this big package which says 24 on it, and it's beautifully gift wrapped, and then lots of small packages, 24 in total, come out of that, and you see the Kohanim and Leviim collecting them from the sky as they fall down from the sky, and the Kohanim and Leviim are collecting them. So 24 dove, I see a dove dropping this big box which splits up into lots of presents, gifts for the Kohanim and Leviim.